So
Okay.
take it away.
So, first of all, excuse my coughing. I got COVID and then croup from my infant, and there we have it. Anyway, I guess actually adults can't get croup, but whatever. I got whatever gave Amalia croup. So we're gonna start not with the presidential debates from the 60s, but instead with a little poll. So what I want to do is I'm gonna put a link in the chat, and then you will all have the exciting opportunity to answer the question in the poll. And I will also screen share if Reb Nachum can make that possible for me.
Should we put our names in?
You do not have to put your name in. Sorry, I forgot to turn off. Don't put your name in. Please don't put your name in. Answer the question.
I think you can
Right.
share screen. I don't think I blocked that.
Okay, let's see if it'll let me. So it will. Beautiful. Okay, cool. Activate, present. All right. Are people submitting their answers to this question?
Wait a
Beautiful.
second.
It's
In your communities, you just have to signal it. You don't have to press submit or anything.
You don't have to, no, you just like hit, yeah.
Just
Okay.
choose.
Is anybody just like struck by anything in this set of results? I think most people have answered by now.
Some things are better left unsaid.
there's a lot of ignorance is bliss that goes on.
Yeah, so I think there are not very many other areas of Shabbat practice that we could have asked about and got this level of I don't knows in the answers.
Right. Think, for example, of like, is it the sort of standard practice in your community to use a kli shlishi to make tea on Shabbat? Even though that's done in private, I would hazard that many people could answer that question with a yes or a no, or like, well, one is supposed to in my community, most people do, but probably some people don't. Right.
And I had a little story I wanted to share before we get going with the sources. So last year I did research for my Hebrew College capstone on Pesach, and when people ask for Pesach and when people don't ask for Pesach. And one of the women who I talked to for that research gave the example that a close family member of hers had got married on Shabbat, and she had asked a Rav about various questions she had around this, like, could she be in the photos, various things, but, how much could she participate knowing that this wedding was happening on Shabbat? And she explicitly said, but I didn't ask about makeup. I felt fine deciding for myself about makeup. So a question kind of to think about right now is, why do you think that woman didn't ask? So she was asking around various questions about the situation. She did have various questions. Clearly, makeup was something that she felt was, she explicitly said to me, I didn't ask about makeup. So, there was a question there that she didn't ask. Why do we reckon she didn't ask that?
Well, there's this point that the Magen Abraham signals to, and I think is just like a larger concept that makeup is recognized to be socially subjective, right? And it's like less of an objective fact. Did this malacha happen or not? And more of a question of how is it perceived? Not necessarily like in legal terms, but that is maybe how people are experiencing it.
So you think she maybe didn't ask the question about makeup because she thought it was too subjective a question?
Yeah, so there's something about makeup that makes it a little bit more, I feel like, okay, this is like a personal business or personal question. That's my hypothesis. I have no idea what was actually going on in this person's head.
Great. Any other? I don't know exactly what was going on in this person's head either. So any more hypotheses?
Looks like Ori has his hand up.
Ori, please.
Maybe there's there's a lot of variation in terms of like what kind of makeup people have. So, knowing even a little bit about the sugya, it's like not exactly subjective, but so varied. Perhaps even I knowing, the world that my daughter has entered into a little bit, like infinitely varied types of makeup and technologies of makeup. There may also be a sense that the ancient sources on this are like almost not relevant to like the technologies of makeup that we have today. And I think that actually goes l'chumra and l'kula, because the makeup is so different and so good, or there's so much on the market.
Interesting. And you think there's something specific about makeup where the technology is so varied and it's so diverse that, unlike things like ways we could cook on Shabbat or other kind of modern technology that affects things, you think there's something, could you say sort of explicitly what it is about makeup that you think is different from these other places where we have varied technology?
Oh, definitely. Like cooking may have changed technologically, but not that much compared to makeup. Like I think what is permanent and what is not permanent in makeup feels like a very hard to pin down thing. Also, if you're a woman who does makeup, and now I'm just hazarding a guess, it doesn't feel like the old rabbis would be in touch with the details of that. I'm not saying they are, they aren't. I'm just saying if I had to guess what somebody would feel, it would be like, how would they have the detailed understanding of this?
Interesting. Okay. And just for sort of further context, the rabbi that this woman asked her other questions to about, being in photos on Shabbat and so on, that was a man her age. So in case that changes how people think about anything. Josie and then Joel, and then I think we'll probably have to move on from this question.
There are a couple of things about this. One is there's a little bit less social pressure on people to conform to a particular makeup on Shabbat. Yes, makeup on Shabbat. No. Some people do try to apply before Shabbat and then hope for the best, which is what I get from a lot of makeup artists who have done my friends who want to show up nice and whatever for their child's simcha on the next day. And it's like, well, remember to sleep on your back and try to do all these things. So people do kind of try to find workarounds, but nonetheless, there's a little bit less social pressure on it, because people just, it's not seen as the same thing, I guess, as even a kli shlishi for tea, which is something that many more people know about. And it's, once again, something that people just, we don't want to ask and we don't really want to know. Kli shlishi for tea is something that people talk about. And also there's the question of like, well, am I really asking somebody who knows about these things and how they impact someone's self-image, or there's a huge amount of subjectivity to it that's very different from the objectivity of other types of personal practices that would otherwise be at home. And I'm still looking for Dottie Fruchter's commentary on this, and I didn't see you include her.
Okay, great. So more comments about subjectivity, and also this really interesting idea that this is something where maybe people don't quite trust a rabbi to answer them on. I see that Rav Joel ceded to Rav Landis. So Rav Landis, if you want to go.
I will say, as a young Rav, a younger Rav at least, I made the mistake of my first halachic shir to give publicly was on makeup. And this was in Los Angeles. First of all, a number of guys showed up because they were all in the industry. And so it's not just a woman's thing, it was a male thing. And so I said, Shabbos, why do you have to look at it? No, you always have to look good. You always have to look good. So that was the first thing. But basically, I give this whole share, and one of the elder members of the shul got up, in this case, a woman, and she said, Rabbi, it's pikuach nefesh. That seemed to be the psak. For years, I heard this from whenever I would reference it. Anyway, just a story.
Great. So I think that's referencing there is this real dynamic here of women actually often not asking, we both saw that the people in this classroom mostly don't know what their communities do. There's something sort of particularly undiscussed about it. And also, or maybe undiscussed amongst mostly men, or maybe a bit of both. And also there's a particular dynamic of people sort of potentially not asking rabbis. So another question I want to have you to have in your minds right now, we're not going to share possible answers right now, but just kind of think about as we go through the shir, what psak would you give that woman? If she had come to you and said, my sibling's getting married on Shabbat, there's going to be photos, what should I do about makeup? What would you have said? So that's just something to kind of think about in the back of your mind. And I'll hand back over to Sarah to give the roadmap of what we're going to talk about for the rest of the class.
Great. So I just want to give a kind of roadmap of where we're going to go. I think we're going to go kind of mostly linearly through the source sheet with some skipping around, but I really want us to be thinking broadly about kind of a few questions. The first is the sort of public-private nature of putting on makeup, right? So it's both something that like everybody can see and also something that like the actual act is done privately, like involving someone's body, like usually in a bathroom. So there is this kind of interesting like public-private play going on. And there's also obviously like a kind of gender nature to this topic, especially in the kind of classical sources, but even going forward. So I want us to just like have those things kind of in the back of our mind, and think about ways that this issue perhaps kind of challenges some of the sort of standard categories we might use. So that's pretty much my main preamble here. I think we've gotten a lot of the kind of key issues out on the table, and a lot of the kind of things that might make this issue both distinct. But I also think like if you think through the list of reasons that you all gave for like why someone wouldn't want to ask about makeup, I wonder whether like you could apply those same reasons to lots of areas of halacha that might come. So with that, I think we'll jump right in. And this first verse is really just a kind of framing of like what might be at stake. So can I get someone just to read this little Rambam at the top from Hilchot Shabbat Perek Lamed? Or you go ahead.
איזהו כבוד זה שאמרו חכמים, שמצווה על אדם לרחוץ פניו, ידיו ורגליו בחמין בערב שבת, מפני כבוד השבת. So what is the kavod that the Chachamim were speaking about? The mitzvah for a person to wash their face and hands and legs with warm water before Shabbat, because of the respect, the kavod for Shabbat, and mitatef b'tzitzit, and put on their tzitzit, v'yoshev b'choved rosh, and be, on a Friday afternoon, be able to sit with a, weighty mind, miachel lahakpalat pnei Shabbat, כמו שהוא יוצא לקראת המלך, to be in the right state to receive Shabbat like you're receiving a king. החכמים הראשונים היו מקבצים תלמידיהן בערב Shabbat, and the original Chachamim sages would gather their students on Erev Shabbat mitatfim and wrap up, I guess on talit. ואומרים בואו ונצא לקראת שבת המלך. Let's go and greet Shabbat the king. I've never heard this without Hamalka. It sounds like a different gender than the usual going to greet Shabbat.
Great, thank you. So I think, and there's lots to talk about here, but I think one of the main points I wanted to pull out is that it can be easy, I think, to think of the question of makeup and Shabbat as a question of a sort of like keeping up with the Joneses or like a keeping up of appearances. But I think already in these classical sources, there is a dimension of thinking about this as a potential part of a kind of broader ritual of preparing yourself for Shabbat. And maybe that all that preparation has to be done beforehand. Like that seems to be what's being described in this source, right? Like you do your bathing and your dressing in advance. But you do your bathing and your dressing in advance in order to appear a certain way when you're greeting Shabbat. And so I think it can be easy to trivialize this, and I think this source helps us kind of not trivialize it in quite the same way. Alan, is your hand up? Sorry,
yeah, just the place that showed up very strikingly was in the Brisa, and in the Gemara that God actually participates in the act of female beautification as like the culmination of creation leading to into Shabbat. I was very surprised to. It's just a powerful image.
Yeah. Great. Oh, no, did you want to say something?
Well, just, yeah, it's an interesting point Alan brought up. You could imagine saying, because it's Davka part of God's creation, it's like actually a paradigm for Malacha. Like I guess it's like you said, it's preparing for Shabbat, but that could also have implications in terms of Hilchot Shabbat.
Yeah, do you want to like spell out like what you think those implications might be?
That you just wouldn't do it on Shabbat.
Yeah.
That beautification is something you do right before Shabbat. It's not something you do on Shabbat itself, maybe.
Yeah. Right. So I think like this source can pull us in two different ways, right? It can pull us towards like, oh, well, kavod is really important and a certain kind of visual representation of kavod is important. Therefore, we want to be makil. Or it could pull us in the opposite direction and say like, well, no, the preparation, like the whole point is that this is a preparatory exercise in advance and not on Shabbos. Mim had that hand up as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this Rambam articulates the thing I was like, I didn't quite raise my hand because I wasn't quite couldn't quite work out how to articulate it, which is I think the reason that a lot of people don't ask about makeup. I think my actual response to the poll as a typed in answer would be, I think I have a general sense in my communities that people believe it to be normatively a problem, but do it but also believe it to be personally religiously important to apply makeup if they're on Shabbat, if they're people who would normally apply makeup on a kind of fancy occasion. And that's because people have a religious instinct that Shabbat is the time when you should like wear your nicest clothing and by extension ornament yourself. And they also have an instinct that it's like a drawing concern or a writing concern, and therefore they shouldn't. Like I think that is, if I were naming instincts that people in my communities have, I think it's those two things. And so they just don't ask so that they can preserve their personal religious practice of looking beautiful.
Okay, great. Okay, I think we're going to move on for now and see some more sources before we get into too much more discussion. But if someone could just quickly read this Leah Sana extract that we have here. Is there a volunteer?
Maybe you'll tell the people who Leah Sarna is.
Rabbanit Leah Sana works for the Drisha Institute and is a Maharat Musmechet.
She's now the rabbi of, I believe it's called Shari Ora, which is in Philadelphia. Yeah, and so this article as a whole is a kind of broad and detailed survey of like the kind of very tashlessy parts of like how to apply a whole range of cosmetic products, including hair gel and like all kinds of other things that aren't what we're going to be talking about here. So like really Mamreach is at the core of what she's talking about, but I think that this introduction was useful in terms of spelling out like what the stakes of what she thinks the stakes of the thing are.
Yeah. Noam, would you be happy to read the Leah Sana?
Yes, I'd be happy to. As cosmetics improve, diversify, and pervade the most basic creature comforts of our lives and identities, this topic has become increasingly important. In a world where people are spreading an assortment of products on their bodies every day just in order to feel clean and comfortable, a discussion of the relevant Hilchot Shabbat seems urgent. We must be able to educate and guide people as they shop for products and apply them to their bodies, especially since community norms cannot be relied on for activities that mostly happen in private.
Great. So does someone else want to just sort of say out in one sentence how this is relevant to the sources we're about to look at before we jump in?
Well, I was sort of alluding to it earlier. I think like, as we sort of zero in on Sovea and permanence, I do think, because this is sort of what I was alluding to, like there's so many different kinds of makeup that there needs to be an updated and clear conversation of what Sovea might be with modern makeup, at least in the particular case of that type of makeup. And I think she's leading there, because it's not necessarily like, hey, you can't wear makeup on Shabbat. It's, let's be really specific about which makeups and what level of makeup is going to be a.
Okay, great. I think we'll just take Joel and then we will jump into the Bavli.
With all kavod to Rabbanit Leah Sarna, of whom I'm a big fan, I actually, maybe people can answer this over time, but whether or not things have actually changed that much and modern makeup is that different. I mean, because you go back, right? Megillat Esther already, right? We see that people have been applying stuff there, to their bodies to make themselves look better for years. It's in the Gemara about women preparing for weddings, for 12 months. So I don't know. I just want to throw out there of like, is the Shulchan Aruch and is the Gemara that far off from what we have today? I don't know if they are in terms of products.
Yeah, one source I think about a lot when it comes to this is a Mishnah somewhere in Kalim, where it talks about whether your dual mascara wand and lipstick applier, if one end breaks, is it makabel tuma? And I think it really goes to show that, these things which we think of as modern, actually makeup in some ways has really, the formulas have changed, but, in some ways, this is basically the same conversation people were having 2,000 years ago. And on that note, would someone like to read the Bavli? Ruben, would you maybe like to read? I'll give people
I
a
would be
moment
happy to read.
find it.
I was raising my hand for a comment, but I would be very happy to read also. Or should I just read?
Great.
Should I just go
You can
into
also,
the
you're
Bavli?
also welcome to say your comments as everyone kind of pulls up the Bavli and finds their place.
Okay. Yeah, just a quick comment, which is something that I was taking from the Rabbanit Leah Sarna piece was different. It was that this is a pressing question because it moves beyond the realm of just women and also just people who we've thought of in the past as traditionally being the people who do put on makeup, and just things that we would consider makeup, like moisturizers and also sunscreen. Like the world of unguents and balms and all the things that we put on ourselves has expanded so greatly that we put them on not just to adorn ourselves now, but also just to feel clean, as she was saying. So that's what I was taking from it as well. And now I can read the Bavli. Hold on.
And one thing I'd just say before you do is I think that's absolutely right. That is one of the things she's saying. And also I'd kind of caution us to note, what it means to say, oh, this isn't just makeup or this isn't just women, when women are already, half the Jews keeping Shabbos, which I know isn't what you were saying, it's what you were saying in the piece, but I think there is something there about, what things we think of as frivolous, what things we think of as necessary, whose needs we think of as frivolous, which I think is interesting to bear in mind as we look at these.
Okay, should I go ahead? Okay. וכן הגודלת וכולי. גודלת כותבת ופוקסת משומי מחייבה. So the first was the Pisgah from the Mishnah, and the Gemara asks, for what are you liable for godelet, which would be plaiting the hair or plaiting the hair? I'm not sure which is the correct pronunciation. Kochelet, which is applying some sort of blue eyeshadow. And fokeset, I'd like to actually pose this as a question if possible. I found two possible definitions. One would be applying something like blush, and the other is sort of plastering your hair in curls around your forehead. And I looked at the Rashi and the Tosfot, and I wasn't clear which of the definitions is being used here.
Great. How did other people read Pokeset here?
It felt to me like, sorry. Yeah, it felt to me like in this text layer, I was reading it as rouge, and then later when it was in a category with, with plaiting as a bonnet thing, that felt like at that point we were definitely dealing in hairdressing. So I was wondering if there was a sort of word slippage thing between the different text layers.
I think
Yeah,
Sarah.
I mean, Rashi just left it open, right? He named both.
Yeah, so Alan, do you actually want to read that Rashi?
Yeah. So let's back up in the Mishnah. V'chein hapokeset. Ish merabotai omrim metakenet sharat b'masrek. Obeyed. Right. So there's some people, some who say that's actually doing the plating with a comb or with your hands. The Yeshu Mefarshin Zacha Kamin Betzek Alpaneha Ukshanat Lom Adim Basar. Right. So that would actually be the spreading the reddening on around her face.
Yeah, but
Like
it's
reddening,
kind of like
reddening dough, like little.
well, I think what it is that it's like exfoliating. It's like by pulling it off, the skin gets brightened, but it's not actually putting any color that is foreign into the skin. That's what I understood. I don't know how other people understood it. Is that what you're saying, Alan? Or is that?
There was a little bit vague on it. So if other people thoughts, I should jump in this one. Just double checking Jeff.
Is that batsik that he's saying in Rashi?
Yeah, it's a dough of some sort. I think it's.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's some kind of stuff.
It's like a poultice. Or
Yeah, I think you put the dough and then you rip it off.
Yes, I think this is something we see.
Kishen not low, right? When you take it away, ma'adim habatzar. The
Okay, so it's some sort of dough that you apply to your face and then remove because removing it brightens the face or something like that.
Yeah, though Rashi seems to leave open the possibility, as Alan sort of alluded to earlier, that it is this like hairdressing situation.
But it's reddening. It's ma'adim.
But there's two.
There's two possibilities, in other words. It could be that it's this hairdressing situation, which would be a bona concern, or it's this like, I don't know, we might call it today like a mask, a beauty mask that you pull off, and then in the process of pulling it off, it does something to the skin. Joel, did you have your hand up before?
Yeah, no, I mean, I know the Gemara is gonna, kind of reject this, but its initial idea that there's Tiviyah, which is kind of the Tosfot's take on, the problem with Rashi in the first place. It sounds like you have to match it up with either Tiviyah or what do they say eventually? Is it Bona that they get? I can't remember what the or do they actually even answer it? Bona. Yeah. Like it doesn't.
So maybe we want to read the Gemara before we
do say that. Okay.
If that's okay, and then we'll talk about the Gemara once we've finished reading it.
So, was it you asking me to read the Gemara? Is that what you're saying?
Up to you, Ruben. Do you want to pass on, or are you happy to keep going?
Yeah. I'm happy to keep going. Happy to pass it on. Should I just keep going? Okay, sorry, I opened a whole can of words. Okay. Okay, so the Gemara asks, for what are you chayav for doing either of these three things? Amar Rav Avin, Amar Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, Godelet mishum oreget, kochelet mishum kotzevet, pokeset mishum tovea. Okay, so Rabbi Avin says in the name of Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Chanina, that you're for Godelet, for plaiting your hair, you're chayav for oreget, for weaving. For kochelet, you're chayav for kotevet. And for pokeset, for which we have two options as to what it is, you're chayav for spinning. So it seems like here maybe we're talking about the hairdressing possibility. Should I keep going in the Gemara?
Yeah, unless you want to hand it off to someone, in which case.
Oh, I'm also happy to hand it off. Yeah,
whichever you prefer. Up to you.
Up to me. Okay, I'll keep reading then if that's okay. Okay. Amru Rabbanan Kame de Rabbi Abahu. V'chi derech hariga b'kach, v'chi derech ktiva b'kach, v'chi derech tzviya b'kach. So the rabbis say before Rabbi Abahu, is this really the typical way of weaving? of writing and of spinning. Ella amar Rabbi Abahu ledidi mi parsha li mine de Rabbi Yossi b'Rabbi Chanina kochelet mishum tzavaat godelet ufokeset mishum bone. Rather, Rabbi Abahu said that this was explained to me by Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Chanina, in this way, that for kochelet you're chayav for dying for tzavat, and for godelet and fokeset you're chayav for bone.
Great. And now
Okay.
this might be a good place maybe to pass on
Yeah.
to Joel if you're still happy.
Okay, I get to do the nice midrash. So here we go. V'chi derech binyan bechach. Right, this is really binyan. In kedidarash Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya, vayiven Hashem Elokim et atzela, melamed shekil'a kadosh baruch hu l'chava v'hevia etzel adam shekain. Okay, so I'll stop there. Actually, even though we'll do the language piece, right? So, like, yeah, if you look right when it says that Hashem was vayiven, the side of Adam, what was the vayiven? That was that he did Chava's hair in a braid and then brought her to Adam, and so therefore we see that that bona and kuf lam and ayin, right, a braid are the same. Braiding is an activity of bona. From that. And then we have a linguistic proof, Shekain Bichrachei Hayam, Korean Kalita Banita, right? So in these, cities over the sea, they call braiding Banita. And so that's a linguistic proof that these two things are related.
Okay, great. And if you want to carry on just a little bit further.
I can keep going. Tanya, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Godelet kochelet ufokeset, leatzma ptura. So he says that if she does these things for herself, then she's tura aval asura, seemingly, or aval asur. Lechaverta chayevet, but it actually is a full chiyuv of breaking Shabbat, not just a rabbinic, not just, but if she does it for her friend. V'chen hayat Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer. Isha lo tavir srak al panea mipnei shetzovat, and we also have this comment that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says a woman should not, seemingly not, she's not chayevet, but it's asur to put some sort of red makeup of some sort, I guess, on her face because that is dyeing or coloring on Shabbat. So.
Great. Okay. And you had a comment of Joel that you wanted to make about this that I stopped you saying earlier. So would you like to go back to it?
Well, I think Rashi tries to do this in the case of Toveh, but we have to match up, right, this idea of, whatever Pokeset is with that it has to be something that could first be thought of as Tviyah and then something that can be thought of as Bona, which Bona here means some sort of twisting or braiding. Rashi does try, right, in the last comment on Sadi Dalet Amud Bet, where he says Toveh shemetakenetz se'ara bein etzboteha ufoshto keshehu nichrach. So it sounds like that she's fixing her hair with her fingers and she's kind of straightening it out when it curls up. That's the first language, and that would be the language of what was the first Rashi? I'm trying to remember. What did he say? It was mitakenet se'ara, right? B'masrek. And Lashon Sheni, he says, osema tobatsek kamin chut, that you make some sort of strings out of the dough, I guess, or you're like, spinning the dough together to make it like a string. I guess my kids do that with Play-Doh. So that, maybe that's true. But you have to match it up somehow. And I think it's none of these definitions quite match perfectly, which just makes it very hard.
Right. Like it does seem possible to me that there is a kind of, there are sets of practices that people do and don't do, and then there's a framework of melachot, and we have to figure out like what is the relationship between those two things, right? And that's like kind of a grand question in Masechet Shabbat generally, but I think is like being played out here in exactly the way you just described, where like there are these practices. Now we've got to like, if we think that it's this business with the dough, now we have to find a way to make it fit into a category of quote unquote spinning. Noah?
This isn't on this topic. It's another question. So I don't know if someone else has something to say on this topic. It seems like some people do, like Ori, for example.
Ori does.
Well, Sarah, I just wanted to add on to what you said. There's two things. You're saying on the one hand, even in the time of the Gemara, there's confusion about which practices with which Isser. But in the case of Rashi, and I'm certainly us, there's also a confusion about what the practices even are, which just I think brings back this kind of topic you entered us with, which is like the subjectivity and not only subjectivity, but this complication in the technologies of beautification, because it's very hard for us to understand specifically what the technologies of beautification. They're lost to us clearly, unless there's like a historian of, specifically ancient beautification that can clarify this. But Rashi already, way before us, 1,000 years before us, doesn't really know exactly, and they're trying to make it make sense in the Gemara, which I think is very logical when it comes to beautification practices. There's great diversity.
I just want to say one thing. I think that Rashi, there's both proposals that Rashi is giving are probably, it's because both of those things he considers to be forbidden. In other words, as us looking, it's agreed that like there's some unclarity about what was going on, but what he's proposing, both of them are, in Rashi's opinion, going to be forbidden. He wouldn't propose something if it would be permitted in his opinion. So it comes out like Lamaisa that both of these things are usher. And then yeah,
which is interesting. Yeah.
I would just add to this discussion that, this is the dynamic in contemporary halacha or halacha the past couple hundred years of defining the metzius, the metziut, finding the reality, like what really is happening, and that bedevils people, and earlier in questions of electricity, even, which we're not going to do right now, but what's really happening. And now we're such a technologically driven society. What's occurring, and then what psak halacha follows from there, and then maybe add a third, what should be public policy. So there's several different elements working.
I do think that it's worth thinking about, like, I'm not sure how much difference there really is with this topic versus other topics like electricity or something like that. We're like trying to figure out where do our contemporary mitzvot fit old categories. I think there's a tendency to think of that as like a contemporary problem, but like, first of all, Rashi is engaging in that problem here. But it's also the case that like when we look at like a red powder that goes on your face, like that's something that's actually just part and parcel of like makeup that you could buy in a store tomorrow. So I think it can be easy to just say, well, oh, these technologies are so diverse and they're so different. But in fact, like, though Rashi is describing, like, is it this practice, is it that practice? Like, many of the practices he's describing are practices that like lots of people.
I agree with you. I am saying is just
I'm trying to agree with you too.
At an early point, it elucidates this dynamic which has increased, if anything. But it's there at the beginning. I agree with you.
Yeah, it's there at the beginning, and I think then like that means that the tradition has resources for talking about it, which is obviously a good thing. Okay, great. So I think really like in what follows, we're mostly going to be talking about just like this last little snippet of this Gemara, which is like, what is asur because of tzovea? What kinds of things that you might put on your face would be prohibited, and why? Noam, are you trying to raise your hand?
Yeah, now I'll actually ask my question now, which is just, I'm trying to make sense of this baraita at the end of the sugya, because it says Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, he says le'atzma petura, and then it says vechen haya Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, say in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, isha lo tavir sarak al paneya. Well, that again sounds like it's
for her.
Le'atzma. So like, is first of all, I found that weird because it sounds like it's grouping together these two statements, which are actually saying the opposite thing. I guess like my way of reconciling it is isha lo tavir sarak al paneya is petura aval asura. I don't know if that's how other people understood it. Okay, I'm getting a lot of nodding, and
I think so. I think that it would have said asur. It doesn't say asur, it just says lo.
Right. Okay, great.
So I think
Yeah, right.
in other words,
She should not do
it doesn't
that.
say- I should correct myself. It doesn't say hayevet. It just says
Right. It says she shouldn't do this. I think implying patur about asur. Okay, but that is going to go to a question of like, as we kind of play this out, is this a question of an Isser Durabanan or a question of a potential Isser Duraita, etc.? Like we'll get to all those issues as we go. Okay, great. So that's really the core sugya, and that's kind of the basis for everything that we're going to do today. Otherwise, so I think it would be useful to see at least the first of these two Rambams, and then we can kind of set out the kind of big halachic parts of the, let's say, decision tree of like where things go after that. So can I get someone to read that first, the Mishnah Torah in Shabbat Perek Chet, or Tet, sorry. People can find
Yud Gimel, right?
Tet Yud Gimel, yeah.
Okay. I can't see other hands, but I'd be happy to read.
I don't see the other people's hands, but maybe there were other hands. People want to read. Mem, do you want to read? Go ahead.
Okay. הצווח חוט שאורכו 4 טווחים, או דבר שאפשר לטוות ממנו חוט כזה, חייב. So someone who dyes a thread that's 4 טווחים long, or something which you could that you could weave a thread of that length out of, זה חייב. ואין הצווח חייב, עד שיהיה צבע המתקיים, and you're not חייב unless you've done permanent dyeing. אבל צבע שאינו מתקיים כלל, כגון שהעביר סרק, או ששר על גבי ברזל, או נחושת וצבעו פטור. But you're patur if it's the kind of color which doesn't last at all, like clay or something else to iron, or brass, which does some amount of coloring, but not in a permanent way. שהרי הטעם מעבירו לשעתו ואינו צובע כלום. Because you can take it off and it doesn't actually, and if you take it off immediately, it doesn't do any dyeing. וכל שאין מלאכתו מתקיימת בשבת פטור, and anything which doesn't have that doesn't work permanently, you're patur.
Great. So this is the kind of initial Rambam rule, right? Anything that isn't mikayim, that doesn't sort of last in some long-term way, is your patur. It isn't sort of obviously a problem. However, that's not going to lead him to just be like totally matir everything. Can we get the next chunk of Rambam as well, please? On the table.
Me or someone else?
Just keep going. Do the next one and then we'll...
Sure. Oh, sorry. The next one here.
Sorry, the next one on the source sheet. So parak.
Yeah. Cool. הצובע מהוות מלאכה. No, wait. Yes. הצובע, it says yes. הצובע מהוות מלאכה, לפיכך אסור לאישה להעביר סרק על פניה, מפני שהיא כצובעת. So there is enough malacha. Therefore, women can't put makeup, rouge, something on her face, because that's dyeing, because that's like dyeing. והתופר מהוות מלאכות, לפיכך אסור למלאות הקר והכסת החדשים ומוחין גזרה.
I think we can actually just like stop there, because I think we got the main thing, right? Which is kitzovat. It's like tzovat. Good. People have like questions, thoughts about these two little halachot from the Rambam. Good.
no.
Oh, Ruben had something to say. Oh, Mim also. Mim and then Ruben.
I think it would be very possible for him to be matir completely on the grounds of what he's already said. Like you could say, given that Savea, like you're anyway patur if you're like actually dyeing something in an impermanent way, or actually dyeing something that's less than 4 tvachim, kava chomer, and therefore this one, which isn't even really Savea, it's kurt Savea, and is also impermanent and is also fewer than 4 tvachim. it would be very, very easy for him to permit if he wanted to, I feel like, based on that shape.
And yet he
Going up-
doesn't. So it just begs the question what kitzovat is doing. The phrase kitzovat is I assume he can't say asur and mean derabanan, so it's almost saying like it's a tolada of the av, right? Because he's raising kitzovat to a real isser. Is that right?
No, I'm doing, or Ruben and then Noah.
I was also going to talk about the kitzovat because I initially was reading it as if it was suggesting that this would be like a gzera because it resembles dying. It doesn't rise to the level of actually dying, but I see that it could be read as a tolda as well. So now I'm more confused than I was before.
Wait, I want to clarify. A tolda is also deraita. A tolda is also also deraita, right?
Yeah, that's what we're saying, that we couldn't parse out if here he means on the one hand it's only kitzavat, so it's derabanan, or he's saying no, I'm saying asur, so it's asur daraita as a tolda.
Yeah,
That's the only other option because he's clearly, take this with the past Rambam, he's clearly the past piece, he's clearly saying it's not sovat, but it's still asur. So I would say tolda makes some sense.
No, or say it's drabanan.
Okay, so I'm not enough familiar with the language.
Well,
Could
we
he say,
learned-
if he says that, could he say asur and not specify it's a gezerah and mean gezerah?
I recall that we learned the first parak of Hilchot Shabbat in the Rambam, and he gave us a list of like rules. When he says asur, what did he say?
Yeah, I've got it right here. It's Aleph Gimel, right? He says, "V'chein kol makom shenemar eino sin kach v'chach o asur lasot kach v'chach b'Shabbat haoseh oto davar b'zadon makinoto makat mardut," which is a derabanan, seemingly. But
Oh, it's drabanan here. It makes sense that it's drabanan.
He's not saying chayiv. That would be the language to
Exactly.
differentiate.
It's strange that he writes like Tovea me'avot melacha. Why does he have to, like? I guess he's just.
Well,
If
that's
I-
what leads me to wonder if
Yeah,
he's breaking his own rules here a little. Just because rhetorically, right? Hatzovea me'avot melachot lefichach asur, etc., etc. Because it is kitovat, sounds like if I just had that sentence on its own without all the preliminaries, I would think that he's saying that it's a tolada. But that sort of doesn't follow his own rules, and he's not one to do that. So I don't know.
No, I don't think we didn't use tolda. Don't put in the
If
word
I
tolda.
remember correctly, there's somewhere in the Mishnah Torah where he actually defines shvut as domel melacha. So that seems exactly what this is like. It's not exactly tovat, but it's get tovat, it's domel, so it's an isser shvut.
I want to also point out that the language of this Rambam is almost identical to the language of the Braita we just saw from Rabbi Shimon ben Eliezer, which was Isha lo tevisera kal paneha mipnei shetzavet. So he's sticking very, very closely to the Gemara here, except instead of mipnei sheh, he's made it k. So I think he's really trying to work with what he's got in the Gemara.
Max?
I agree.
I'm just noticing that the next few halachot in the Mishnah Torah start the same way. Right, Kaf Dalid is hakorea me'avot malachot lefichach, etc., etc., and hatokeach, the next one, chayav mishum bona lefichach, etc., etc. So it seems like the intro language here of hatzovea me'avot malachot. I mean, I think there's still the question of how to read the therefore, but it seems like that intro is just part of this section of the Mishnah Torah and how he's introducing different.
Right, and if you look at, I think you're right, and I think they're all intros to things that are derabanan. Like in Kaf Hey, he says lo notli notan. He doesn't say chayav.
Right, and there's gzera. It says gzera there too. So
I think we probably need to
this
move
is
on.
if you look at 21.1, which is the Rambam switch, I think, right? He's everything up till there is pretty much deraita, and then he switches to shvut, and he says, "I'll just want to read a little bit of language." Nemar b'Torah tishbot afilu midvarim she'enam melacha chayav lishbot mehen. right? And he says there's udvarim harbe hen shasru chachamim mishum shvut. So the rabbis forbid a lot of things because of shvut. Mehen devrim asrim b'mnei shem domim lemlachot. Right, so some of them are things because they're like malacha. The rabbis said you can't do it because it's shvut, and then there's the other, which is gzera shema yavo, right? Lasot malacha, but that's not the category we're talking about here.
But are you saying, or could we say that shavut is a bitul aseh? What the rabbis do is give the getter of what that is. So you're supposed to be tishbot. Rabbi, what does that mean? The rabbis say these are some of the things that it means. So it's still like that original shir I gave. It's still like the Maram Lublin, who says the lotas seems to be the identifying mark for everything, including the shavut. Tishbot. It's a bitul aseh of tishbot as defined by the rabbis. Therefore, being a shvut, that is something which is doma to tzaviyah. That's all.
Okay, I think
but you know, you could say that potentially about all shavut. Why is it called shavut? Because it's a bitul of a bitul of the mitzvah to say of Shabbos. Why these particular ones? Because it's doma, that would give you that rabbinic feel. But in other words, the gezerah, in terms of what belongs to Shavut, is D'Rabbanan, but the impact is D'Oraisa.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
So
I think that brings us.
Go ahead, Justin.
I think that brings us nicely to this smug, which we're going to see does not completely agree with the Rambam here. So Jacob, do you want to maybe read the smug?
Okay. Vigarsinan nami biperek hamatznia, isha lo tavir sarek al pna mitneshet sotvat. B'chol ela lo matinu chiyuv el kisharam chapet ota tzvia. So in our Girsa, also in this parak of Isha, it's that a woman should not pass this sarek, this dough, maybe on her face.
I think we can maybe call it blush. That might be the
Blush.
easiest
Okay.
thing to, or rouge.
On her face because it will be coloring. But in all these, we don't find a chiyuv except when a person wants that color. And I'm not sure if Adam is, broadly speaking, and just referring to like the woman who's applying it, or like a man that would be with her or something like that.
I think it's using man expansively to refer to women. Yeah.
Yeah, that's yeah. So there has to be this, the implication here is that there has to be this aspect of intentionality and desiring the color, which I'm not sure exactly why you would be.
And perhaps permanence specifically.
Okay. Okay.
So does someone want to spell out the machloket between the Rambam and the smag here?
Or at least what are they doing differently?
Okay. Well, this mag seems to be saying that there is he uses the term chiyuv, and he says it is tzava'at. So that sounds like it is referring to ba'at, right? That is Teresa. But whereas for the Ramban, it's we've now established it's true Rabbanan. On the other hand, the smag seems to be more mako than the Rambam, in that he introduces this subjective element of like what makeup is for that the Rambam didn't talk about. Does that make sense?
I think that makes sense.
I don't understand how that's lakula in the end. I'm not totally understanding the wanting that exact tzvia. Isn't that the intention of the person? Isn't he just saying they need to desire that color and it can't be?
Because if you, I think one idea would be that the standard is just a different standard, right? So for the Rambam, like what counts as fiyah is like, it has to be like mikayim for a long enough period, as opposed to, I have to just want it to be there. And whether or not it's going to be there in 3 days is really neither here nor there, right? Those are two different ways of thinking about it.
The maple cake came up in the Shulchan Aruch, right? The strawberries, like where the smug would say it's fine and the Rambam would say it's not.
Yeah, exactly. Because, yeah.
But it's not makil in the case of makeup. It's just makil in the case of accidentally coloring your face with random fruits.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really just talking about general melechet machshevet. If you didn't want the thing and you did it, then it's like a psik resha, or it's not even a psik resha, it's psik resha lo nichale, or it's eino mitkaven. In other words, it's just something that you didn't intend to do, then you're obviously patur. And I don't think the end there is actually that significant. I don't think anybody argues on that. And the real part is the beginning where he says that it's usher and it's a chiyuv. And then therefore he's totally more machmir than the Rambam. I would say the Rambam would agree that, of course, if you didn't intend to do it, then you're patur.
But is it possible that he does mean something by it? Like, if you don't want to permanently be that color. I mean, I'm just sort of putting it in now, but to understand what the significance of the comment is at all, because
I don't think any coloring that you do on your face is going to be permanent ever. I mean, unless it's a tattoo.
Which I think is the smug's point. The smug is saying, how can you possibly say that it has to be, permanent to count as severe here? That's not relevant. The standard of permanence when it comes to face colouring would be it's lasting the amount of time you want it to last.
That's interesting.
I think, that's possible, but that's putting a lot into what he's saying that's not there. It's not explicitly there. I don't see him talking about, it just says that you want the color. It doesn't say that you want it for 24 hours or for a certain.
But you want it for some reason, right? In other words, like the color is the color it doesn't do me any good if the bar mitzvah is in the morning and I have the color at Shabbos dinner, right? So like the point is that like I want the color for a purpose at a time, right? Like in order to want the color, I also want it in some time-bound context because like none of these things are permanent at all. I think that's like the.
I think that's successfully explained.
I think he's talking about like if you put something on your face because for medical reasons, and it happened to color your face, that it wasn't you didn't think it would do that, you didn't want it to do that. He's saying that's for sure patur, but any other kind of coloring when you do want it is usher. I don't think he's talking about permanence here at all. That's just,
there's no nafkamina, but it does answer the question why he's making this comment here. Like we're looking for a reason why he disagrees with the Rambam, and I think Jessica and Sarah explained that this could be sort of the context. Like, why do I consider it permanent? Because you want it to last that amount of time.
In other words, all right, I hear what you're saying. You're asking
Rambam, which we read, which was like, oh, I dyed it and it didn't stay. I wanted it to and it didn't stay. It's not an effective color.
In other words, he's saying, why am I, says the smog, able to say that you're chayiv when I agree with the Rambam, the other halacha in the Rambam, where he says that if you put the color on a piece of metal that can just wash off, it's not permanent. Why would I say by the face that you're chayiv? Why wouldn't I say it's also not permanent? Because anything you put on your face is not permanent. And so we're answering for him, because it's got a level of permanence that regarding faces is called permanent. That's beautiful. It's just, that's my it's just putting a lot into the words that are not explicitly there.
Just so that you see, Jessica and I both did this at the same time. We didn't give you this Chai Adam, but the Chai Adam does read it the way we were describing, right? Where he says,
well, I have to agree with Rabbi Danzig.
This is not surprising.
היינו שמערים לשעתו, אין זה צובע, כן כתב הרמב"ם, וסמג חייב, כיוון שרצונו בזה, שיתקיים לפי שעה.
Wait a second, Ken Savar HaRambam, he said.
But then he says, v'hasmag.
V'hasmag.
Right, but the smag does it
He's
for
grouping them together. He's not putting it.
Because he assumes that it is there for the amount of time that you care about, right? Which I think is like
But I'm just saying he's not
version
saying.
of what we were
No.
trying to say.
Yeah, but maybe I would say like this. It sounds like I didn't see it inside, but it sounds like that he's saying both the Smag and the Rambam agree on this point, and that he's bringing it's sort of like from out of left field. He's bringing another parameter, which is that permanence. Maybe
I don't see how. I don't think there's a way to read that if the Rambam he's saying ein zet savea and then he says Philismag chayav.
Well, I don't have the you have it. I didn't see that. You just I don't
It's
have
in the
text.
chat.
It's in the chat.
Oh, it's in the chat. I just was relying on my memory of what you said. Chat. Yeah.
So I think the real question here is how we read mikayim and how permanent something has to be to count as makeup. We have this idea maybe that makeup is impermanent because makeup is impermanent. And we also have the idea that actually makeup is permanent enough. It is lasting for the purpose you wanted it to last for.
I just want to add quickly. I know I'm sorry, Joel. If I'm the kiyum is required, right? Is our requirement from malacha is not subjective. Just to remind us, is not subjective, but it's defined in terms of the normal activity, the normal expectation of that activity. So it's not just what you want or how long you want it to last, but how it normally lasts. Sometimes there's always experiences in which something happens differently. So if the normal experience is you put on the blush and it's going to last through the kiddush, that's what it is. But and therefore it's it's a or it could be that the kiyum of that particular makeup is only 20 minutes or it's only 10 minutes, but that's its kiyum. That's its kiyum. It's not depending upon what you want. It's dependent upon how it normally behaves. I bumped into you, Joel.
Is it?
I think
Okay.
That's the last word. Then we need to take a break.
Sorry, who gets the last word? I didn't hear what you said.
You.
Oh, I think it's interesting because when we get to kosher, we'll see this more. But I think as to whether or not kiyum is subjective or objective is a little bit of a machloket between the Taz and the Mechaber. But I don't know if we can we I ask, can we apply the rules of kiyum, which do exist very strongly around kosher, to other topics, or is it just kiyum as a general idea, but the same type of kiyum in kosher does not apply elsewhere? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. So.
Okay, I think that's a very interesting topic that we do not have time to get further into.
Okay, I think it's universal
I'm
principle.
afraid.
Just throw it in.
So I think we're going to take a 5-minute break now, and then we're going to come back to see the Tur Shulchan Aruch and Achronim. You're all very welcome to keep debating about this in the 5-minute break if you would like. Any volunteers to say how the Tur and Shulchan Aruch take this? Mim, was that a hand? You're muted.
Yeah, sorry, I can use
Go
the
for
actual
it.
reactions. You can't wear rouge / makeup because of Savea. And you can't plait your hair, but you can maybe part it. Definitely with your fingers, probably / possibly with a comb.
Great. Does that match what other people saw? And did anyone have any comprehension questions about the Tur Shulchan Aruch here?
Okay, good.
Great.
I think I'd love to see that. Let's read the Magen Avraham inside because I think it's really sociologically quite interesting. Can I get someone to read that Magen Avraham?
So
Go ahead,
Ranch,
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Mac. Excuse me.
Okay. משום צובע, כיוון שדרכה בכך מקרה צובע, מה שאין כן באיש, כמו שכתב סוף סימן ש"כ, ומכל מקום אינו אלא מדרבנן. So this is tsovea because this is how she puts on her makeup, and so it's called tsovea. But that's not the case for men, because that's fundamentally different in some way. But in any event, it's only d'Rabbanan.
Right. What do you make of this like sociological or gendered distinction that he seems to be making here? Like that's not a question just for Max, a question for anybody.
Well, I recall reading I remember reading an essay from the Trans Halacha Project that discussed just, I don't know if it actually brought this, but it made the argument that like sometimes when we're talking about gender, we're talking about how like just people are defining it in any particular point. And that like maybe the distinction here is not about the derech, that like, oh, all men must always have a particular way that they're thinking about makeup, but maybe like if the way that men thought about makeup in that particular culture changed and all of a sudden the men were putting the stuff on, then it would then become usher for them. But not that there's some like fundamental like distinction between men and women here.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting possibility, especially like in our own world where, you know, maybe our gender categories are more fluid or complex. I think I saw at least one other hand. Or
First of all, just to say out simply the understanding of what he's saying. Mikol makom eino ela mid'Rabbanan means for women it's also mid'Rabbanan. So that's first of all that goes back to our previous conversation about, is this Sovea Mamash? I mean, clearly it's not Sovea Mamash. Even if they're not using the language of Kit Sovea, they still mean it's a lesser type of Sovea than the normal Doraita, A. And then B, so that means for men, what he's saying is it would be not Asur at all, right? Not even D'Rabbanan, just to clarify. And does he mean the unintentional coloring of the face, or does he mean putting on makeup? That's now a really interesting question. So is the Kedarka Shedarka Bekach a question of what does that exactly do? Is it making it more Kayam? Clearly it's not Kayam enough to be Doraita, according to the Magen Avraham at least.
yeah, I mean, I think one option is it's more likely that a woman would want, like it would be you know, she would want it because it is the kind of thing that women mostly do, right? Or something, or even something and so then it sort of fits better, at least even on the like in the sort of smug scheme. It makes more sense to say that there's something real, there's like real marashut to what's going on, because it is the kind of thing that women often do, and often do for a particular purpose in a way that, like, I think part of what's going on here is they just can't make sense of the idea that a man would be doing this.
And it would possibly be usher as like Beged Isha or something in a totally other, you know, halacha. So we must not be talking about intentional coloring on a man. I don't know.
It's kind of nothing. I think one other question that this raises, and I think it's sort of interesting and goes to some of the stuff that Alan and Aaron had us thinking about last week, is like, how is this Siman of the tour organized as like things that women might do in public in Shabbat, and then on Shabbat, and we're gonna file these questions about makeup under questions about, you know, other things women might wear in public. So this is like a question about women, and like it happens to be a question about Sovea, like sort of because that's like the rubric it goes under, but really it's a question about like how women are behaving, or is it actually a question about, and like, or is it a question about a certain kind of malacha? And like for the Rambam, it's a question about a certain kind of malacha. I would posit. As opposed to like how women behave.
Then it would apply equally to men and women. But here we've got this issue, this separate issue for women, and then they refer to the seif in in Shin Kaf, where they talk about don't get fruit juice that stains all over all over yourself. And there are questions about how do you have to be careful with this, because if I'm putting color on my face and I'm a woman, with intent, it's one thing. But if I'm smearing pomegranate juice because I'm really enjoying this pomegranate on the new year and I accidentally wipe it all over my beard, which would apply to like Rav Joel or Max or Daniel, obviously, or Alan, that would be a different type of staining and a different type of coloring, a different issue altogether. But we're all still precluded from tzovea. It's simply the intent here is with makeup. This is a type of tzovea. Here we have fruit juice. It's a type of tzovea.
But it does seem like it. Oh, go ahead, man.
It felt to me like the imaginary man who's doing this is doing it intentionally as a rouge. But the reason it's not tzovea for him, whereas it would be for our sort of less imaginary women who are doing it, is because it's not kedaka, and like it's imagining a world where, like, I think the read that made most sense to me, although I'm not completely convinced by it, is there's a real category of thing that exists that is putting on makeup that is like dyeing, and if you're doing a thing that fits recognizably into that real sociological category, then it sort of has enough sort of substance that it can be asur d'Rabbanan. But if you're doing something that's in any way like enough removed from being the action, for example, by your gender or by the way that you might do it or anything like that, that it can take it out of that already kind of flimsy category, which is a sort of d'Rabbanan category, but is linked to this d'oraita tzovea category. Like, that's the only way I could make it make sense. But
I mean, I think one sort of related way to think about what he's doing here is to say, well, it seemed like for the smug, this was a kind of purely subjective thing, right? Do you want it there or do you not want it there? I, the Magen Avraham, I'm gonna say like, well, I don't want this to be purely subjective. So I'm gonna use these gender categories as a way of kind of making sense of a subjective standard, but making it look objective, right? Making it look like it kind of follows these social patterns of like, what's the normal way to behave in a certain situation. I think that's one thing that's going on here. The other thing that this source made me think about, which I think is really interesting, is a few years ago, I heard Rav Elisha Ancelovich give a paper at the AJS about Hilchot Shabbat, and he basically argued that many of the kinds of things that make up like the rest of the Siman of like, going out with like this kind of diadem thing on your head or not, are actually ways that the Chazal are trying to give like soft prohibitions on practices that they feel uncomfortable with, but they don't want to fully prohibit. They want to kind of regulate and like rein in. And I think that is a really interesting possibility, and it's a possibility for thinking about makeup too. Is like one of the things that whatever we decide about how we're going to regulate makeup eventually is going to end up, changing somebody's relationship to it. During Chol as well as on Shabbat.
Can I just jump in for a second?
Sure.
Yeah. If the Chai Adam pointed me to this Magen Avram in Siman Shin Kaf, and at the end of Shin Kaf, and he says there, he brings the same exact discussion, and he gives a little bit more information. If you look in Shin Kaf, Seif Katan Kaf Hey 25 in the Magen Avram, he says, V'afal gav de tzovea panav yadav lechem lemechash te'ein. He says, even though coloring your face and hands is not a problem, and it's not a thing that we would worry for. Why? And here's the point that really I thought was relevant to us. The ein tzvia ela b'davar shedarko litzvoa. It's only tzvia if the thing that you are trying to color is a thing that is normally colored. If you are trying to color, as if you're coloring something that nobody colors, like toilet paper. Nobody tries to color toilet paper. They try to color cloth or their face, maybe. He says like this. But the hands and face are not something that people. Why? He says, Velo dami l'siman shin gimel. I don't know what that abbreviation is, but the isha darka bekaf.
Sif Kaf Hey is what he's referring to.
Sif Kaf Hey. So that isha darka bekaf. In other words, the difference between men and women is that it is normal for women to it's the skin. Is the skin a substance which is normally colored? And he says on that it depends on whether you're a man or a woman. By women, it is a thing that's normally colored, and therefore it's usher. But by a man, it's the thing on which you are coloring. It's not the level of the permanence, or in this case, I mean, whatever. The discussion here is about whether the thing you're coloring is a thing that's normally colored, and that's the distinction between men and women. And that he means over by us in Shin Gimel also. I think that brings a little bit more clarity.
Yeah, that helpful. That context is very helpful. Great. Other things about the Magen Avraham before we move on. Cool. I'd love to see. We sort of talked to it. I'd love to see the Mishnah Brura inside as well. Can I get someone to read that?
May do we want?
Oh,
Sarah, do we want?
Maybe
do we want to maybe start by saying we can maybe see some of this inside, but from when people read this earlier, what's in the Mishnah Brura and the Biur Halacha changed how you're thinking about this, or which bits seem particularly relevant to the conversation we've just had?
Yeah, good. We should press on.
Yeah, Max.
Well, he brings up in particular in Ayin Tet here, particularly coloring on skin, right? The phrase "Ein Sfiad Midoraita Al Or Hadam," right? That we hadn't seen before.
Mm-hmm. So, do you want to read maybe just Ayin Tet for us?
Sure. Start at the beginning. Okay. Srak Hutseva Adom. Uvtosefta ita shelo tekaneach panea beveget sheyesh bo srak. Umashma afal gav de lo mitkavenet letzvia psikre shehu. Utam hadavar kivan de isha darka bechach liyafot et atzma al yedei tzviat panim. Nechze shapir ketzovea. Okay, so talking about something that's red. And there's in the Tosefta it says that you shouldn't wipe your face with a cloth or something that has this powder on it, meaning that even though she's just trying to wipe her face, she's not trying to be sovea. It's a psigresha, and the reason it's a psigresha is because this is generally something that a woman does to try and beautify herself. And so it seems like tzovea a little bit more than it otherwise might, given the inam mikavena. Aval ish she'in darko bechach lo mikrek tzovea kemo shekatav sof siman shach. Okay, but with a man, you don't have that problem of meaning you don't have the problem of the psikresha with wiping the cloth, because there isn't an expectation that a man is gonna do that. The mutar le'echol tutim v'shar perot hatzovim aval gav detzovea panav yadav be'ir hachila, and that's why it's mutter to eat, fruits that might color your face, because even though they color your face or your hands, it's not normal to expect that, and so there's no psigresha issue. Umikol makom afilu ha'avarat srak al pnei isha gam kein eno el dirabanan de'ein svia midoraita al or ha'adam v'ien bebiur halacha. Right, but in any event, putting this powder on a woman putting this powder on her face is still only a dirabanan, because there's no such thing as tzvia d'oraita on human skin.
Amazing. So this is a huge chiddush of the Mishnah Berurah, that the reason it's D'Rabbanan is because it's sever on skin, which we haven't seen anybody say. Does that make sense to people? Does that not make sense? How do we feel about this?
Is that not, could that not be maybe what the Rambam sort of meant with Kitzovea? I mean, we don't
In what
know,
ways?
but
Spell it out.
similar. Well, just that we were trying to figure out why the Rambam called it Kitzovea, and no one else does. So that's interesting. But I do think it said a lot in terms of like it not being real dyeing, just in a simple sense. When you put color on a face, it doesn't have the, you know, the what other cases of Tzovea have. So we don't know for sure, but it definitely could parallel.
I'd be a little skeptical of that, just because the Rambam also said that putting eyeliner on was kotev, and he didn't say anything about that being D'Rabbanan. So that kind of implies that he doesn't think in general that skin is what makes such a difference necessarily.
No, but that's a different malacha.
Possibility.
That's a different malacha.
True.
So it could be that by tzovea, the thing that you are coloring has to be a substance that's colored and not skin, like the Magen Avram said. And but writing could be on things, on surfaces that are even not normally written on. It's a good question. You don't normally write on skin either.
Yeah, it seems a little strange, because even if it is a different malacha, like the problem, you could apply a very similar logic that says, well, that's not the kind of thing you normally write on, or it's not the kind of thing writing normally sort of sticks
And
to.
like, sorry.
Go ahead. Mim and
I
then
guess
Ken.
to concretize it, my colleague has henna nail polish that she put on at her son's wedding 2 months ago, and still has meaningfully dyed her nails. Like, she has orange nails that look like nail varnish as a result of henna dyeing that she did on her skin. And I don't know how long henna lasts on skin itself, but like actually a long time in a very much dyeing shape. Like I don't think it's obvious at all that there's nothing that can be called dyeing that you do on human skin. Like, I think it is reasonably, like, there are things which are a lot more dye-like that people do on skin than rouge or kohl.
Great. So that's saying that maybe makeup isn't directed surveyor, but you're holding out a possibility that there is some other kind of directed surveyor that could happen on skin.
Yeah. And I don't think it's obvious to get to the Mishnah Berurah sort of world where anything that you do on skin isn't surveyor director. Like, what if I intentionally dye my skin using dye?
Okay, great. Joel?
I just think that the Sha'ar Tzion there is really interesting. It's what is it? Sameh, right? Yeah, right.
Great. Do you want to summarize it for us?
Yeah, well, he essentially says women don't take from this, women can't eat strawberries on Shabbat because they usually dye their face, you know, with makeup, then maybe they can't put any color on it. He's like, we're not going to distinguish there. And he says, well, maybe also because it's only psik ratio for her lips, not for the rest of her face. But it says, but the dafka b'tzarak al paneshu derech tzfiat talanoi, right? It's only with, you know, this red makeup that she normally does. It's not with people don't put berry juice on their face usually to dye it. So he's not willing to make a distinction there. It's both the skin and the substance are both important here that we're using. So
great. So I think before we move on to the Tshuvot, which we should do next, before we run out of time, I just want to draw out that there have been sort of two strands to how we've thought about this Mishnah Berurah. So there's the idea, a thick question about, you know, maybe this is really about impermanence, and that's what the Mishnah Berurah is getting at here. That's sort of what Mim was saying. And then we've also had the position that Rav Nachum was saying, and I think, Joel, you kind of covered both of these a little, that it's actually something about the malacha of Tzveya. So I think there's actually a real nafkamina in which of those we think it is, whether we think this is about permanence or whether we think this is about the intrinsic nature of Tzveya. And I think we just want to hold those in mind as we go on to the Tshuvot. And now would anyone like to read Rav Moshe?
I'm doing.
Or is that a volunteer?
I'm glad to read.
Okay, we've got
I just
I
want to
thi- I
make one
think
last comment
both-
on the Mishnah Berurah because it's an important question that I have that I hope we'll get to in the end.
Okay.
Nobody has been Meforash yet addressed if a man puts on makeup on purpose as makeup. Like the Mishnah Berurah actually disambiguated because he said this is talking about, he did not give that case. He only gave the case of a man by accidentally coloring as if that was the only possible case. So I'm just waiting for somebody to address it directly because we have no psak on it.
Great. Yeah, and I don't think any of the sources Sarah and I looked at address that explicitly, and I think it's a great question to hold in mind as we go through these tshuvot. Yeah, Alan, go on. You can read Rav Moshe.
Yes, can you all hear me?
Wait, sorry, wasn't that the case that the Magen Avraham in Yud Tet was thinking about, sort of semi-hypothetically, the man wearing makeup intentionally case?
At best,
I
it
think
was
he was
unclear.
thinking of the man
what
eating
he was
strawberries
referring-
case.
No, but he
Yeah.
got there via the man wearing makeup case, I felt like.
I thought it wasn't clear. It could have been, but
I think that the challenge is he invoking that the man wearing makeup case only as the kind of inverse of the woman wearing makeup case, or is he just saying as a way of saying, well, this is just what people normally do? I mean, it seems like it's just kind of invoked as a kind of almost a parallelism because of what Rav Nachum was saying, but like actually what's really at issue here is like, what is the kind of thing that's being
I would like to add very quickly, Mishnah Berurah is the manual of halacha par excellence. He's all the way through, he's making decisions. He's not being mefalpel. He's not like even here having discussions about it and all the rest. And he makes certain decisions. And he is loved, let's say, as opposed to Aruch HaShulchan, which is more discussion oriented, but he's loved by, how can I say, Haredi leaning communities, by other communities, Haredi leaning communities, because he gives you a final psak. What you bring up already is it's never final because there is actually something new to say right now. So maybe you have to decide it already, or someone else is the group.
And just to clarify about the Magen Avraham, he refers to Shin Kaf, which I think is about the fruit, right? He doesn't. So Magen Avraham was also clearly talking about the fruit case, not the intentional.
Yeah, and he's invoking men only kind of as the inverse of women, I think, in order to just kind of make his like conceptual paradigm kind of fill out. But yeah, because of, I think in particular of the other Magen Avraham that Rav Nachum pointed us to earlier, it seems like it's really about it's almost really about surfaces even for him. And so then and then the Mishnah Berurah kind of
just let me say one more
that
thing.
up to 100.
It's a bit complicated because there's two factors. It's the whole thing the Mishnah Berurah here is talking about is mechaze kitzovea. Does it look like you're doing tzvia?
Yeah.
It's not really tzvia because you're eating strawberries. You're not doing tzvia. You're just eating strawberries. And he's saying, he's saying it's mutter because you're not trying to. And then he says about a woman with makeup, he's saying, but a different case about using a cloth. And there he's saying that it's her derech, and therefore it looks like she's coloring, even though she's not trying to color. Also there, she's not trying to color, but it looks like she's trying to color. But a man, if he would do something that incidentally colored, then it wouldn't look like he's coloring because men don't normally color. But that might mean that if a man was trying to color, just like if a woman was trying to color,
So there's no Maris Ayin for a man.
Right, there's less Maris Ayin for a man, exactly. And therefore, but of course, if they're trying to color, that's a different story.
And it's a very interesting question. And before we come back to it, maybe at the end, if we have time, Alan, will you read the Rav Moshe?
Yes, I had thoughts on Nachman's point, but we'll hold up. Okay. Ulivar in Notella Ishali Kashe the lipstick. Hine Asura, Mishnetam, Miaser Mimachek, Miaser Tzvia. Okay. Can a woman put lipstick on Shabbos? It's also for two reasons. For it's like scraping off and for tzvia. Bim hulach, shalekonachik, ishakopanim, isertzvia. And even if it's wet and you're not worried about the scraping issue, you still have to worry about the dyeing. Aval, lizrok at the powder levan alapanim shalamikaim klal and bezesertzvia. Okay. Can't dye your face, but you can put powder, white powder on because it's enamikaim.
Does it have to be white?
Let me say, just powder levan.
He addresses non-white powder in another tshuva, where he says that coloured powder should also potentially be okay, but that you need to be a bit careful about, the chemical formulas of these things and which ones have oils in, and this sort of thing. Would someone like to read Rav Vadia, just so we have all the modern tshuvot here on the table? Ori, sure.
I'm always willing, just נשאלתי אם מותר לאנשים לתת אבקת פודרה צבעונית על פניהם בשבת. I was asked if it's allowed for women to put on powder, colored powder on their faces on Shabbat. ונראה שאין ללמוד איסור נתינת פודרה צבעונית על פניה מדין העברת סרק על פניה. And it seems that you shouldn't learn the issur of powder from srak. Deshani havarat srak shehu davar mitkayem, because srak is something that's going to be mitkayem, and that's different. Aval netinat pudra al panim lo chashiv davar mitkayem, but this powder is not considered something that's mitkayem. Shehazia ma'avarato bizman katzar, that sweat could actually take it off in a ze'ah, in a short amount of time. Shani hacha she'af b'ma'averet srak al panea shehu davar mitkayem. And even putting on srak on her face would have only been, even if it was sort of mitkayem, that's only midrabanan. Because there's no tzvi'ah on the skin, like we saw in the Mishnah Berurah. Because it's just not considered real dyeing. And after that, the powder is dry and it doesn't stick. And when it like comes off, there won't be anything left at all. So it's not even like it leaves a little bit of a mark, which you could say is sort of tzvia. And even if for colored powder, the main thing is to allow it. Sefer HaMeorot al liba de'arif v'hashlama mutar lehavir srak al paneh b'Shabbat. So also according to the Rif, it was allowed to put sarak. Unihidalo kaimalan hachi, because it didn't really stay. Havudalo lahosif ala.
Even though we don't follow that opinion. That's how you read it.
Thank you. Yeah. Even though we don't follow, right? So the Rif is sort of the minority opinion. But it's all the more so reason not to add a chumrah on this powder issue. Especially because there's unless to exclude a case where something with their husbands.
Oh, especially.
Oh, especially.
It's especially because there's another reason that the husband shouldn't be disgusted by their wives.
Right. Okay. You knew. I was trying to figure that out.
Yeah. I mean, I'm translating too strongly. Well, they shouldn't be displeased. Yeah.
I think disgusted is a good translation.
Okay. Disgusted. They shouldn't be disgusted by
throw that in. Yeah.
By the way, this explains to me what I've seen in all these movies in the 1930s. I've got to go powder my nose. And then now I understand why they have to go powder the nose, because it comes off every half an hour.
Yeah, I mean, powder is a wide range of powders and their sticking powder, let's say.
I'm saying he's talking about those kind of powders that come off quickly. He says a little bit of sweat and they come off.
This is where I had all my questions from, because I really do think that technologically there is a very wide range between powdery makeup and other makeups. No, Sarah, tell me.
I have to say that, like, just experientially, that does not seem true to me at all. In other words, yeah, like different, thicker, more oily substances might stay less more in different ways. But like, I actually think that there's such a wide range of like what people's skin looks like and what different products look like that I just don't think that those distinctions make a lot of sense. If other people who have worn or do wear makeup regularly have thoughts about that question, I'm happy to hear them. But just like kind of experientially, I just don't think that.
Well, he's trying to make it. He's trying to make a distinction between the srach that was forbidden, and he's saying, well, the powder is less permanent than whatever the srach was.
Yeah. So I think the question I want to ask, and I want to kind of like try to get us focused on this question as much as possible, so that we can see the other things we want to see, is just how will we characterize what sources Rav Moshe is kind of implicitly relying on here to make his decision, or what conceptual paradigms he's using, and what conceptual paradigms is Rav Ovadia using. And like, let's just like characterize those things. So I think that getting that out there will like help us be kind of understand what each of them is doing. Does anyone want to just like, let's start with Rav Moshe. Like, what if you have to be like, well, Rav Moshe is holding like so and so, like who is he? Whose like language approach is he using? Joel?
It really seems to be, I mean, he doesn't quote the Rambam, but it seems the Rambam, right? It's about kaima, right, at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's about kaima, and it just so happens that powder is in kaima, so that's fine. And it doesn't matter that she seems to want the powder there for some sort of cosmetic purpose, whatever. That's what matters. That's it. Good. How about Rav Ovadia?
It seems the same. I don't see the difference. It's definitely a discussion about kaima and how long it would stay. Did I miss something?
Well, he's also saying it's because it's on the skin. So he's also relying on the Mishnah Berurah here.
Yeah, so Jacob, I saw Jacob, Ruben, and Joel. And then
I was just gonna say Mishnah Berurah because of
good. Ruben, did you have something else?
I was gonna say the same thing. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, right. So it does seem like the Mishnah Berurah is playing a role here. Joel?
I think there's a deeper like thing of how we make psak in the Rav Ovadia, which is, right, that there are reasons also to be lenient because it's a derabanan, and the Rif, even though we don't hold by him, holds that this isn't asur at all, right? Otherwise, we might say, yeah, it's temporary, but like we might like err on the side of caution, right, and not allow it. But because there are more lenient reasons, therefore we can follow the it's not shel kaima and be lenient about it, as opposed to, I imagine if he said, well, nobody thinks that it's allowed to put srach on, not even the Rif, and it's a deraita, then I don't think he would come to this conclusion at all, right? He would come to maybe a very different conclusion.
Good. And just quickly, the last thing I think I would say is just that they, like, we kind of all somewhere between chuckled and cringed at this last little line, but I think it is what he is trying to get at, perhaps in a way that we might like not feel super comfortable with. In that last line is a kind of question about sociological realities and psychological effects and all of those kinds of things. You don't see explicitly in the Rav Moshe, but I think kind of also maybe at play as we think about like how we might treat this question on our own. Cool.
Okay. Great. So speaking of sociological concerns, these last two sources, I'm wondering, does someone have a very good, completely outraged voice to read this Gaonic tshuva that we put next? Only want someone who can do an extremely outraged voice.
I'm sorry, I missed something. Sarah, was that last comment about Rav Ovadia?
The last comment was about Rav Ovadia and his line about husbands, right?
So I got it. So I want to say something about this. Is that Rav Ovadia is he could be extraordinarily corrective of his society, of his primary society, his Sephardic society, And many other times, it almost goes back to your initial conversation, you and Jessica's conversation about what people do, etc. And just many times with him, he's very protective in terms of how the society works. So I think one of the major influences on Rav Ovadia is that many religious women for a long period of time have been using some forms of makeup, and therefore he's ready to be mako on that because of what he's, how he sees the dynamic is, which is also a halacha principle. It's not like, didn't take it out of the air, didn't take it just from sociology, but that's the way he operates, I think, quite often.
Yeah, I think it's also notable that there's a way to think about what, like, he's not being critical of his social arrangement here. He's just trying to figure out a way to live in it or something like that. And I think that that's like actually one of the core tensions at issue in this whole debate, right? And especially like, as I was looking at these sources, I was thinking a lot of like kind of 1970s era feminists who are very upset about kind of makeup as a general practice. And they're upset about it because they see it as like capitulating to all of these pressures to appear a certain way, right? And we might say too that like, we don't want people to have to wear makeup on Shabbat and to capitulate to those pressures. We want people to learn to resist them in the same way they learn to resist, let's say the pressures of capitalism and the desire to work all the time or something like that. So there is a way in which, like one of the core questions here is if you think that the kind of emphasis on physical beauty is a potential problem in the general culture, is that something you want to resist, or you want to kind of minimize the psychic pain of the people who have to kind of live in a world where those kinds of physical appearance stuff like really, really matters? I think that is actually like one of the core problems that you have to think about as you give talk about this kind of thing.
So I think that's great. Thank you. I think it's very, very insightful. On that, I would also say that we shouldn't neglect the fact that within very Haredi societies, there is often pressure or pushback against the anti-beauty manifestations in more fanatical forms regarding, women their face being fully covered, like in the very, but even less than that, when, now it's kind of funny how I'm saying it, when that Rav Ovadia, the young Rav Ovadia Yosef, now I'm taking from him from the other side, went out against Scheidels, went out against marital wigs. There was an uproar in Bnei Brak because women should look good. And then when the Scheidel makers decided, in a sense of a certain kind of compromise, to make the Scheidels very unattractive, there was also an uproar. I'm not a sociologist, I can't figure out who really won at the end. But but this is, are people afraid of women's beauty or not afraid? I think Rav Ovadia in general, except for the Scheidel question, is not afraid of women's beauty. And he says Darko Bakach, right? It's definitely gender specific in his case.
Okay. I think those are all really interesting and important things to think about as we go on to the next source. Josie, can you read in a appropriately outraged voice?
Tuva, חכמים שכמותכם מסתפק לכם בדבר ברור הזה? אישה אינה מחייבת בשבת כאיש? Furthermore, haven't smart people already made this really clear to you? Aren't women also required in the same way as men in Shabbat? Bishlama לעניין תכשיט, יש חילוק בין תכשיט איש לתכשיט אישה, אלא מלאכה יש חילוק בין אישה בין אישה לאיש, לא כך כתיב אתה ובנך. So even in the case of adornments, there's some difference between what men can use and what women can use. But with malacha, there's no difference between man and woman. Isn't it written, you and your sons and your daughters? Od lav gemar d'Rabbanan hi behedya d'amarinan v'kein hagodelet v'kein hakotelet v'kein hapokeset. So don't we have this, in addition, don't we have this clear Gemara that we have brought down? So are you, what's going on with all you guys? Did I get it right?
Amazing. Great outraged voice. So we're in the Gaonic period. This is a very, very long time ago. And the Shaila has been asked of, can women wear makeup on Shabbat? And we get this outraged answer back, Hachem Kamatchem, wise people like you don't know the answer to this. It's explicit in the Gemara. It's said that women can't wear rouge. It's said that women can't wear eyeliner. Why are you asking me this question? And this is actually really interesting when we think about it, because why are they asking this question? The fact that someone thought to ask this question, even though it's the pshat in the Gemara that women cannot wear makeup, is because clearly women are wearing makeup already in Gaonic times. And so we have these questions being asked. And I think this goes back to the dynamics we talked about right at the start of this class about, to what extent are women just wearing makeup and ignoring what rabbis say about it? To what extent are women not asking the rabbis? And we brought this passage from Avraham Grossman's book, Pious and Rebellious, which I think we won't read inside right this moment. But what he says is, there's often this dance, he's talking about the context of medieval Europe and the Rishonim, between what rabbis are saying and what women are doing. And what Avraham Grossman says is it's not actually as simple as saying the women are rebelling and not obeying the rabbis, because often the women see themselves as being pious or are doing things out of their own religious instincts that don't accord with the written halacha or what the rabbis are saying. And there's a bit of a dance going on here. And I think we can see that around makeup, whereas we've seen, a lot of people who do wear makeup every day, their instinct is, well, of course, I should wear makeup on Shabbat, because how can I look less nice on Shabbat than I do during the week? And that goes back kind of to the Rambam that Sarah brought at the beginning. And so I think we see different religious instincts play out here. And we see, as Rav Landis was saying, attempts to balance that in some of these sources in the Rav Avadia, and attempts to be accommodating of these instincts. So with the last 4 minutes of the class, I just want to go back to that question we had at the beginning. The woman who did not ask the Shaila of what makeup she should wear to her sibling's wedding on Shabbat. And I'd like everyone to just take a minute. We're not going to take any hands for 60 seconds. And take 1 minute to think about how would you answer that woman? So I'm starting my 60 seconds now. Okay, and because there isn't going to be time for everyone to speak, and I would actually be really interested in what you all have to say, if people could write in the chat what they would say to that woman in summary, then we'll at least have a chance to read each other's if we don't have a chance to fully argue out the different positions. Maybe 5 seconds to finish your sentence and then write and submit. Okay, great. And once you've submitted yours, if you just take a moment to read what other people said. Okay, if anyone wants to respond to anyone, the floor is open. It is 4 or 9 or 11 o'clock. You are all free to leave, but you are all also welcome to respond to each other if you'd like for a few minutes.
I would just defend my own. I wouldn't attack anybody else's reasoning, but I think it's always nice to make an effort to keep Shabbat in a tough situation when you already are on the fence and maybe they're not inclined to, they know what they have to do sort of from a family perspective. But it seems like we saw enough sources that could help somebody find a way to be, keeping Shabbat in a meaningful way. Like if there was a shvut to shvut of some sort. If there's a shini of some sort. I know that families usually hire makeup artists all afternoon and you just sit in the chair and they do the next person. I don't know if that helps with a Mira Lagoy or something, but there could be something there, or the type of makeup that they choose could be better.
Joel, I'm really glad you brought up the actor Chua from Rav Moshe, which I think is such an amazing Chua. But one thing that's striking to me about that Chua is that he ends up basically, if I remember correctly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but he basically says like, well, you shouldn't be an actor in the first place. Like that's not a like kind of kosher way to behave. But I think it's actually really instructive for our case because like it is a kosher way to behave, to go to your sibling's wedding and to like figure out some way to show up there, even on Shabbat. People would argue, maybe people would disagree with that, right? But I think like there's an argument to be made that like what you're doing is actually something that is like kind of in accordance with the kinds of values we want you to be following. And so then we want to find a way to make this possible for you, like Masha in Kane when the guy is like the hired actor. I was also really struck by Josie's thing about like whether she wears makeup normally on Shabbat, because I think the wedding is this like complicating factor, right? Where like it might be much more significant than just like a regular Shabbos.
Mim and Alan, you don't have to. I'm not picking on you, but I think you had the biggest disagreement between your two opinions. So if you wanted to each go for a second.
I don't think that there's significant that a saklik derabanan is a strong enough reason to like put this woman in a very difficult social situation about something where there's actually reasonably widespread practice in reasonably observant communities that women do at least do some level of on Shabbat. Like possibly her full face of makeup that she's doing for a wedding is sort of more intense or like involves different substances than is typical in like some observant communities for women to put on. But like without getting into the specifics about what makeup she can and can't do, it doesn't feel like I've got like, if we're just talking about stem makeup, I don't feel like I'm seeing things come together as a reason to be usher against a lot of people being potter, or at least against like a widespread practice of being potter without any clear sort of even real thing going on in my head.
And just to clarify, what's the suffix that you see?
I'm actually borrowing a Sapphic language from Alan there.
I should have been more precise, right? I agree with him. I think the suffix for me is like, you know, as someone who's starting to get more asked, like the occasional Shayla, like I do feel like a weightiness when I'm not like 100% sure, such that if someone just like asks me on the street, I'm not going to say like, okay, you're definitely okay for that thing, unless I'm like completely and 100% clear. But like, if this person were asking me like as just like a friend who knows some halacha, as opposed to posik, I might say to them, this like feels okay, and there's like enough like to stand on that you should go for it.
I have a lot of questions about how the surroundings do impact this. For example, let's posit a person who does not wear makeup on Shabbat and who says, I don't really want to do this.
Mm.
Her family be embarrassed, or would she embarrass her sibling by showing up in a face that's unmade? So in that case, you have the other question now of, do I want to embarrass my family and in some sense, you know, make observant Jews look, you know, not awesome? And I don't mean with bad makeup.
Okay.
I mean, like you have so there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of sociological concerns around here, and
Interesting.
that we're dancing around.
Yeah,
I'd feel motivated to give her grounds on which to feel comfortable wearing makeup if that's something that she like instinctively wants or feels that she needs to do in this context. I wouldn't feel motivated to make her feel pressure to do so if she had a religious instinct to the contrary. I actually think her religious instinct to not put on makeup, and especially to not put on a heavy face of makeup, is something that she completely would like be within her rights to uphold, and that is a instinct that I like. If the thing that she was looking for was grounds to hold that as a boundary, that would be grounds that I would want to try and give her. Actually, like I think those are both real religious instincts. This isn't me being like equivocating. I think that those are both real articulations. I don't know.
Can I just say a quick thing?
Yes, and then I think Rev Landis has the last word, and then I'm having rachamim on everyone, and we're all leaving.
Okay, so just 2 points. One is there are kosher, there are makeups that are permitted to use on Shabbat, and if we can promote that and not, in other words, if since we don't want to belittle those people who are doing that, so we want to show that there's a viable alternative, present that. Secondly, I think if we want to be lenient, the language we could use and the concept we could use would be kavod habriot doche de rabbanan. I think that would be the best language to use. And we would have to say this, it would have to be a case where obviously it was kavod habriot, where really the person would be deeply embarrassed without it. And in that case, I think we could say doche de rabbanan. I think that would be the language that we could use halachically.
Rev Landis.
You're on mute, Rev Landis. Did everyone else hear Rev Landis appear to say something and then disappear from the screen?
It looked like he tried to unmute and instead clicked the exit button.
I think that's right. And I think given that we are 8 minutes over, we should probably go and save any last remarks for emails. Kol hakavod, everyone.
Kol hakavod, Jessica, and kol hakavod, Sarah. Beautiful, beautiful shiur.
Beautiful job.
Very clear. Interesting. Nice work. Now I got to close this.